For 2 years, I thought my husband was slowly falling out of love with me, one unanswered text at a time. I was wrong about almost everything, except the part where our marriage really was falling apart. I was just wrong about whose hand was actually on the phone. It started small enough that I didn't notice it as a pattern for a long time. He'd take longer to respond to me during the day. A birthday I mentioned twice would slip his mind entirely. Little things, plans I thought we'd made that he had no memory of agreeing to. I chalked it up to a demanding new job, to two people getting comfortable enough to stop trying as hard. I want to be honest, for most of those 2 years, I actually believed the distance between us was simply what happens to marriages after enough time passes. I never once considered someone else was creating it on purpose. The first crack in that belief showed up on an ordinary Tuesday. I was using his laptop because mine was being repaired, and a text notification popped up on a browser extension he'd forgotten was linked to his phone. It was from his mother. It read, "Don't worry. I deleted the message about her sister's wedding before he saw it. He doesn't need one more excuse to spend a weekend away from real family." I sat with that sentence for a long time before I understood what it actually meant. I went back through that extension's history, which had been quietly logging notifications for months, without either of us realizing it was still active, from an old troubleshooting session. What I found wasn't one deleted message. It was dozens, spanning almost 2 years. Anniversary reminders I'd sent him that he apparently never saw. A conversation where I asked if we could go to counseling that got deleted within 11 minutes of arriving, before he'd so much as opened his phone. Messages from me apologizing after arguments, gone before he could read a single one, replaced in his memory by nothing, which is its own kind of erasure, an apology that simply never seemed to come. His mother had been staying with us on and off during a rough patch in her own living situation 18 months earlier, and had somehow retained access to sync his notifications to a tablet she used, ostensibly to help him keep track of his schedule while he was overwhelmed at work. Neither of us had thought to question it once things calmed down. She never gave that access back, and instead used it to quietly delete anything that made our marriage feel closer, and occasionally to send responses in his name so I wouldn't notice a message left unanswered too long. I need you to sit with that last part specifically, because it's the moment I actually stopped breathing normally for a minute. Some of the short, distant-sounding replies I'd received over those 2 years, the ones that felt like him pulling away, weren't him at all. They were her, typing as him, in his voice, well enough that I never once suspected. If you're the kind of person who thinks you already know where a story like this is going, stay with me, because I promise you it gets worse before there's anything resembling better. And if this is pulling you in already, hit subscribe now, because the next part is the one that made me question whether my marriage was worth saving at all. I didn't confront him immediately. I spent 3 days building a timeline instead, matching dates in that notification log against real moments in our marriage I remembered clearly. The fight after my father's funeral where he never followed up the way I expected. An entire month where I thought he'd simply stopped caring about a miscarriage I was still grieving. Both of those had a deleted message sitting exactly where his response should have been. When I finally showed him the log, his reaction wasn't what I expected. He didn't defend her. He went pale, actually pale, and asked to see his own phone's synced device list, which he hadn't checked in over a year. There it was, a tablet registered under her name, still connected. But here's the part that almost ended things before we got anywhere close to fixing them. When I asked him directly, "Did you know, even a little, that something like this might be happening?" he hesitated. Just for a second, but I saw it, and so did he. He admitted that 6 months earlier, he'd noticed a message from me about wanting to try counseling had somehow never reached him, and instead of investigating it, he assumed I'd changed my mind and never sent it, and let it go rather than asking me directly. He hadn't known the scale of what was happening. But he'd had a moment of doubt about it, and chosen comfort over confronting his own mother. And that choice cost us 6 more months we didn't need to lose. That's the part I couldn't get past for a while. Not what she did. What he didn't do when he had a chance to. I told him I needed distance to think, not from him exactly, but from the version of our marriage I thought I understood for 2 years that turned out to be partly manufactured by someone else. I stopped answering calls from either of them for 8 days. I remember specifically telling my closest friend during that week that I didn't know if I was angry at him or at the situation, and that not being able to tell the difference scared me more than the anger itself. On day 5, he showed up at my friend's apartment, which he'd never done, and he didn't ask to come in. He stood in the hallway and told me he'd already gone to his mother's house and removed her access from every device himself, in person, and recorded the conversation on his phone in case I ever wanted to hear exactly what was said. Not to prove anything to me, he said, but because he needed to hear himself actually say it out loud to her, since he'd never confronted her about anything in his entire life before that day. I listened to that recording 3 days later. I want you to understand what actually convinced me, because it wasn't an apology. There were plenty of those already. It was one sentence in the middle of that recording where his mother tried to justify it by saying she was only trying to keep the family close. And he said, back to her directly, "You don't get to decide what closeness means for my marriage. That's not your choice to make. It was never your choice to make." That's the version of him I hadn't heard in 2 years. Not distant, not passive, actually standing somewhere and staying there. If you're wondering whether this is the part where everything resolves neatly, it isn't, not yet. And I think that matters to say honestly, instead of wrapping this up faster than it actually happened. We spent the next 4 months in couples counseling, which we finally got to attend, ironically, after the exact conversation that had been deleted from his notifications for months. Half of those sessions weren't really about his mother at all. They were about the 2 years we'd each quietly built a private, wrong story about the other person. Him assuming I'd pulled away first, me assuming he had, neither of us checking with the actual person in front of us before deciding what the silence meant. There was one session, month 2, where the counselor asked him directly why he never simply asked me, in person, why I seemed distant, instead of assuming an answer. He said something that stuck with me long after that session ended. He said, "I think somewhere along the way, it was easier to assume you were pulling away than to ask and find out I was the reason, because asking meant I might have had to actually change something about myself, instead of just being sad about a story I never verified." I won't tell you I forgave instantly, because I didn't. There were nights that month I still felt the 2 years as a kind of grief, mourning time we didn't actually have to lose, time a third person had quietly stolen from a marriage that otherwise might have been fine. That grief doesn't resolve on a schedule, no matter how much the person across from you is genuinely trying. If you've made it this far, I want to ask you something before we get to the ending, because I think it matters more than the resolution itself. Have you ever assumed silence meant something specific about a person, only to find out later the silence wasn't even coming from them? If that's familiar, let me know in the comments, because I think more of us have lived some version of this than we realize, and subscribing means you won't miss the next story that might hit even closer. His mother did not come to Thanksgiving that year, or the year after. That wasn't punishment exactly. It was a boundary he set and held without renegotiating it every time she asked, which was new for him, and which I noticed more than any single apology he gave me. We moved 40 minutes further from her, not dramatically far, just far enough that convenience stopped being an excuse for proximity to turn back into access. The moment I actually knew we were going to be fine came almost a year later, not in a dramatic scene, in an ordinary one. He mentioned offhand that his mother had texted asking to meet for coffee, just the two of them, no mention of me at all in the message. He showed me the text before responding to her, not because he needed permission, he said, but because 2 years of him hiding communication without meaning to had taught him that showing me things, even small, ordinary things, mattered more than he used to think it did. He wrote back that any time with her going forward included me, or it wasn't going to happen. She didn't respond to that message for 3 weeks. When she finally did, it was an agreement, on his terms, for the first time in either of their lives. We're better now, honestly better, not because a secret got exposed and neatly resolved, but because we finally started asking each other directly what silence meant, instead of quietly deciding it alone. I regret the 2 years we lost to an assumption neither of us checked. What I don't regret is finding out the truth even this late, because the alternative was living the rest of our marriage inside a story someone else was quietly writing for us.